Have you ever watched a smug man in a $3,000 suit trample your life's work, convinced his bank account buys everything, even your pride? The newly rich always believe a check with 8 zeros grants them immunity, but they forget one detail. True power never shouts. It waits silently in the fine print. Grab a strong coffee. I will tell you exactly how I turned a tech billionaire's crowning moment into a flawless public execution. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Gianna Simmons. I am 38 years old, and I am the founder of Crescent Heritage Holdings. Most people in my position sit in climate-controlled offices, reviewing spreadsheets and drinking expensive coffee. Not me. Right now, I was suspended 15 feet in the air on a scaffolding platform, wearing heavy canvas overalls thickly smeared with dark industrial grease. In my grip was a heavy steel wrench, and I was manually balancing the central tier of a massive crystal chandelier from the 1920s. This was the Brass Crown. Located in the beating heart of New Orleans, it was a historic jazz club and boutique hotel that I had traded 3 years of my youth to resurrect. After the last hurricane tore through the city, the building was a rotting carcass of shattered glass and waterlogged plaster. I had poured my blood, sweat, and sanity into pulling this architectural masterpiece back from the brink of demolition. The air here still held the faint, sacred scent of aged oak, floor wax, and decades of spilled bourbon. That sacred silence was violently shattered when the mahogany double doors swung open. Enter Jackson Vance. Jackson was a tech fitness billionaire who built his empire selling subscription workout apps. He was also the man preparing to finalize a $28 million acquisition of the Brass Crown. He marched into the grand lobby surrounded by a sycophantic entourage of assistants. He wore a sharply tailored custom suit that probably cost more than my first car, and he radiated a suffocating cloud of cologne that smelled overwhelmingly of new money, arrogance, and profound shallowness. I wiped a streak of black grease from my forehead and looked down. Jackson stopped directly beneath the chandelier, his expensive leather shoes stepping carelessly onto the newly restored heritage tiles. He glanced up, his eyes sweeping over my stained clothes, the heavy wrench, and the electrical wire resting over my shoulder. In his shallow mind, the equation was simple. I was wearing dirt, therefore I was the hired help. He assumed I was just some overworked maintenance mechanic trying to scrape together a few hours of overtime pay. Without a shred of basic human decency, Jackson reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, and casually tossed a crumpled $100 bill onto the antique floor tiles. It fluttered down, landing right next to his polished shoe. He did not even bother to look me in the eye when he spoke. "Hey, grease monkey," Jackson barked, his voice echoing off the acoustic domes. "I have VIP guests arriving tonight. I need you to drop whatever pointless wiring you are playing with and go polish the entire brass handrail system on the main staircase. I want to see my reflection in that metal before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Do not mess this up." Before I could even process the sheer audacity of the demand, Jackson had already turned his back on me, addressing his followers with a booming laugh. "Listen up, guys," he bragged, gesturing toward the far corridor. "You see that hallway down there is the original underground speakeasy from the Prohibition era. Total waste of square footage. As soon as the ink is dry on the contract tomorrow, I am bringing in the heavy machinery. We are going to rip out all that rotting antique wood, pour a fresh slab of concrete, and build a massive, neon-lit infinity sauna. It is going to be the ultimate premium check-in spot for influencers." A sharp, icy spike of pure rage drove itself directly into my chest. The speakeasy he was talking about was a legendary piece of cultural history. He wanted to destroy an irreplaceable piece of soul just to build a sweaty concrete box for internet celebrities. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to climb down. throw my heavy steel wrench directly into his perfectly capped teeth, and scream that I was the true owner of the building. But true power never shouts. It observes, calculates, and strikes when the blade is sharpest. I swallowed the burning venom in my throat and forced my muscles to relax. Slowly, deliberately, I climbed down the metal rungs. I walked over to where he stood, my worn work boots stopping inches from his Italian leather shoes. I bent down and quietly picked up the crumpled $100 bill from the heritage tiles. I slipped the cash into the breast pocket of my greasy overalls. I looked at his back, flashing a perfectly cold, empty smile that he could not see. "Consider it done, sir," I replied softly. I stood there in the shadows of the grand lobby, silent, watching this arrogant fool parade around the room, openly desecrating the heritage I had bled to save. Let him enjoy his fantasy. Let him believe his bank account made him a god. He had no idea he had just handed the executioner the exact rope needed to hang him. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut upstairs, sealing away the obnoxious echoes of the billionaire and his entourage. I was left alone in the suffocating quiet of the underground speakeasy. The only illumination came from a few caged utility bulbs, casting long, trembling shadows against the exposed brickwork. I walked slowly over to the back bar, running my grease-stained fingers over the original dark oak counter. The wood was cold to the touch, grooved by decades of history and spilled secrets, but to me, it felt like a beating pulse. 2 years ago, my entire universe had imploded. My former business partner had vanished overnight, leaving behind a staggering debt of $7 million in fraudulent loans and a completely cratered reputation. I was staring down the barrel of total personal bankruptcy, dodging aggressive collection calls while selling my own furniture just to keep my remaining staff paid. This building was not a calculated real estate portfolio expansion. It was my only lifeboat in a violent storm. I remembered the freezing winter nights, standing right here on this very floor at 3 o'clock in the morning. My hands were bleeding and heavily blistered as I personally chipped away thick layers of black mold and rotting plaster, because I absolutely could not afford to hire an extra demolition crew. I slept on a cheap folding cot in the boiler room. I ate cold canned soup for dinner. Every swing of my hammer, every nail I drove into the floorboards, was a desperate fight for my own survival. The brass crown absorbed my tears and gave me a future. As I stood there reflecting, a sudden, gnawing unease settled deep in my stomach. Something felt terribly wrong. Call it the primal instinct of a cornered animal, or perhaps just the hypervigilance of a woman who knows every single inch of a space she rebuilt with her own bare hands. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight from my tool belt and began a systematic sweep of the basement's perimeter. The air down here was usually thick with the rich scent of aged timber, but now there was a faint, acrid chemical odor. As the sharp beam of my flashlight swept across the far corner, near the foundation's core, the light caught a sickly, unnatural glare. I stepped closer, my breath catching violently in my throat. Slashed across the center of a massive, load-bearing red oak pillar was a jagged, fluorescent orange X made with industrial spray paint. My hands shook as I moved the light down the row. There was another glowing orange X on the next pillar, and another one after that. These were not just any wooden posts. These specific structural supports were classified as Grade 1 protected historical assets by the City Preservation Board. Defacing them was a serious municipal crime. Preparing to destroy them was an unforgivable atrocity. My mind raced frantically. When did he do this? I sprinted up the hidden service stairs, bypassing the main lobby entirely, and locked myself inside my temporary management office on the mezzanine level. I dropped into my leather chair and immediately fired up the closed-circuit television feed. The new buyer's security team thought they had full control of the property network, but they had no idea I had kept the legacy security cameras active on a separate, encrypted server, completely unlisted in the official handover documents. I scrubbed the high-definition video timeline back to the previous night. At exactly 11:15 in the evening, the black and white footage showed the rear alley service doors being forcefully pried open. Jackson walked in, looking around suspiciously. He was completely unauthorized to be on the premises. Worse, he was flanked by 4 men wearing hard hats and carrying expensive laser measuring tools. It was a professional demolition crew. I watched the time code tick forward as they spent over 2 hours mapping out the structural supports, taking core samples of the masonry, and marking the protected wood for immediate destruction. This was a catastrophic, fatal breach. No buyer has the legal right to alter, assess, or even enter a secured commercial property with private contractors before the final closing signatures are inked and the massive wire transfer is officially cleared by the bank. "You arrogant fool," I whispered to the glowing monitors. The heavy, suffocating weight of grief inside my chest instantly evaporated. It was completely replaced by a crystalline, absolute coldness. The mourning period for my building was over. The hunt had officially begun. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, bypassing the standard security firewalls of my own company network. I pulled up the massive, 200-page master purchase agreement for the $28 million sale. I did not need to search for the breach penalties or use the find function. I knew exactly where to look. I scrolled rapidly past the standard liability clauses, blew past the zoning disclaimers, and stopped dead on page 74. There it was, waiting silently in the digital ink. Clause 22C. It was a highly obscure, specialized legal trap regarding acoustic structural integrity that I personally mandated in every single heritage contract my firm drafted. Most bloated corporate lawyers representing these tech billionaires glossed right over it, stupidly assuming it was just boilerplate language about neighborhood noise pollution. They never realized it was a lethal, hair-trigger tripwire. Clause 22C explicitly stated that any unauthorized physical alteration, vandalism, or preemptive structural mapping that threatened the historical acoustic resonance of the architecture would trigger an immediate, non-negotiable nullification of the entire sale, with absolutely zero right to cure the breach. Jackson Vance thought he was untouchable. He thought his endless piles of cash made him a king who could rewrite the rules of reality. He had no idea he had just stepped squarely onto a legal landmine, and I was the one holding the detonator. I abandoned the mezzanine security room and sprinted up the narrow, restricted spiral staircase that led to my true sanctuary. Hidden in the highest attic of the brass crown, concealed behind a reinforced steel door, was my central executive office. It was a stark contrast to the grease and dirt of the construction zones below. Equipped with high-speed fiber optics, secure servers, and heavy oak desks, I slammed the heavy door shut, hit the secure line on my desk phone, and dialed my lead corporate attorney. "Drop whatever you are doing right now," I commanded the second he answered the phone. "I need you to pull up every single document, addendum, and appendix for the $28 million acquisition. Wake up the entire legal team. We are going to war." While my attorney frantically gathered his senior partners on an encrypted conference call, I turned my attention to my dual monitors. The illegal demolition crew mapping the basement was just the physical proof of a breach, but I needed the bureaucratic paper trail to completely bury him. I logged directly into the secure municipal planning portal using my developer access credentials. Every buyer of a heritage property must submit their proposed architectural plans to the City Council for strict approval before any sale can legally close. My eyes scanned the dense digital archives until I found Jackson Vance's official submission file. I opened the architectural documents, and a harsh, cynical laugh escaped my lips. It was a complete and utter fabrication. The blueprints he had legally sworn to and submitted to the historical board showed a gentle, respectful restoration of the property. It showed the basement speakeasy being preserved as an upscale wine tasting room. He had intentionally lied to the highest municipal authorities. He submitted dummy documents to easily bypass the strict conservation laws, fully intending to bring in the sledgehammers the absolute second the keys touched his hand. It was not just a breach of our private contract, it was systemic, premeditated fraud against the city government. "I am looking at the master contract." My lead attorney's voice crackled through the speakerphone. If he had a crew mapping the load-bearing pillars for demolition, he triggered Clause 22C, We have him dead to rights on a massive material breach. It gets significantly worse, I replied, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard to open a new tab. He submitted fraudulent structural schematics to the zoning board, but there is something else. I had opened Jackson's primary social media account. Staring back at me was a massive, highly produced digital flyer. Blazoned across the screen in aggressive neon letters was an invitation to a massive, exclusive live stream event. The location was listed as the grand lobby of the Brass Crown. The time was set for 8 o'clock tonight. The sheer, blinding arrogance of it all was almost hard to process. The $28 million wire transfer from his holding company was not scheduled to clear the escrow account until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Legally, he did not own a single brick of this building yet, but in his bloated, narcissistic ego, the paperwork was just a boring formality. He was throwing a massive digital party tonight to launch his new fitness apparel brand, using my historical lobby as his conquered territory, parading his victory to millions of followers before the check even cleared the bank. "We need to file an emergency injunction immediately," my attorney urged, his tone shifting into professional panic. "I can wake up a superior court judge right now. We can draft a cease and desist order, freeze the escrow account, and legally lock his entire team out of the building. We will drag him into a brutal litigation process. We can tie his company up in civil court for the next 3 to 5 years. "No," I stated coldly, cutting him off completely. "Listen to reason," he pleaded over the speaker. "If you do not file the injunction, he is going to broadcast his brand from your property. A massive lawsuit is the standard protocol for this level of corporate fraud. Standard protocol is for people who want to spend the next 5 years paying endless legal fees and sitting in sterile mediation rooms," I fired back. "If we sue him, his massive public relations team will just spin the narrative. They will claim I am a bitter, greedy seller suffering from a sudden case of buyer's remorse. They will bury the fraud in closed-door settlements and non-disclosure agreements. I am not going to let him control the narrative for a single second. I want his reputation executed immediately, in public, in front of the very audience he is desperately trying to impress." I terminated the call. The time for corporate diplomacy was entirely over. I opened a blank word processing document and began to type. Every keystroke was a calculated, lethal strike. I drafted a formal, legally binding notice of emergency contract termination. I cited his unauthorized entry, the destructive mapping of protected heritage assets, the explicit violation of Clause 22C, and the fraudulent zoning submissions. I stated clearly and unequivocally that the $28 million transaction was permanently null and void, effective immediately. I hit print. The laser printer hummed, spitting out the single, devastating page that would end his entire empire. I signed my full name at the bottom in thick black ink. I did not fold the paper into a standard white business envelope. Instead, I reached into my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a heavy, premium envelope made of thick, deep crimson paper, the color of fresh blood. I slid the termination notice inside and sealed it tight. Jackson wanted a show. He wanted a spectacular live broadcast to celebrate his conquering of my legacy. I picked up the heavy crimson envelope from the dark oak wood of my desk. I was going to give him the most unforgettable performance of his entire miserable life, and I was going to deliver this death warrant personally. By 8 o'clock that evening, the refined, dignified soul of my building had been suffocated. Standing in the cold night air of the back alley, I could feel the historic brick exterior vibrating. It was not the smooth, soulful vibration of a stand-up bass or a brass horn. It was the aggressive, bone-rattling thud of cheap electronic dance music blasting at 120 beats per minute. A relentless, synthetic snare drum echoed through the alleyway. Jackson and his production team had dragged massive, industrial concert speakers into the grand lobby, completely murdering the perfectly balanced, century-old acoustic design I had painstakingly restored. Searing beams of harsh, acid green and electric pink neon light flashed erratically through the stained glass transoms. He had transformed a majestic temple of jazz into a tacky, disposable nightclub. It was visually offensive, but I did not feel angry anymore. A predator does not feel anger when the prey waltzes blindly into the kill zone. I stepped up to the discreet side entrance. The heavy canvas work overalls, the steel wrench, and the motor grease were completely gone. I was dressed for a totally different kind of demolition. I wore a brilliant, custom-tailored burgundy pantsuit cut from sharp, structured wool. Beneath the tailored blazer, a black silk blouse absorbed the dim alleyway light. My feet, which had spent the last 3 years crammed into heavy steel-toed boots, were now arched inside a pair of razor-sharp, 4-inch black stiletto heels. I did not look like a tired maintenance worker scraping by for an hourly wage. I looked like the apex predator of a corporate boardroom. I exuded the absolute, chilling authority of a queen walking straight through the front gates of her own conquered kingdom. Jackson had hired an expensive private security firm for his exclusive launch event. 2 massive men in tight black shirts stood guarding the main doors, checking digital guest lists on glowing tablets. They were completely useless to me. I slipped my master keycard from my blazer pocket, tapped it against the concealed scanner hidden beneath a brass fixture near the service entrance, and slipped silently into the darkened service corridor. The temporary security team had hastily set up a monitoring station near the cloakroom. Tapping into what they assumed was the main network, they were amateurs. Using a secure application on my phone, linked directly to the building's hardwired legacy mainframe, I effortlessly overrode their permissions. With 2 taps on my screen, I remotely disabled the internal camera feeds, monitoring the VIP lobby area, looping the last 5 minutes of footage. I was now completely invisible within my own fortress. I navigated the hidden staff passageways that ran parallel to the main hall, moving like a ghost. The heavy thumping of the bass grew deafening as I reached a grated ventilation panel that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the grand lobby. I stood in the absolute darkness of the crawl space, my burgundy suit blending into the shadows, and looked down at the Vanity Fair below. The room was packed with hundreds of invited guests. It was a sea of fitness influencers, minor internet celebrities, and tech investors. These were people who had never swung a hammer or built a single thing of lasting value in their entire lives, all holding up their smartphones mounted on glowing ring lights. They were drinking expensive champagne from plastic cups, completely oblivious to the rich heritage surrounding them. Right in the center of the room, positioned directly beneath the 1920s crystal chandelier I had manually balanced just hours ago, was a massive, brightly lit stage, and standing on that stage was Jackson Vance. He had changed out of his custom suit and was now wearing a skin-tight, sleeveless athletic shirt emblazoned with his new company logo. Aggressively showing off his heavily tanned, muscular arms, he held a wireless microphone in his right hand, pacing back and forth across the stage, soaking up the flashing camera lights like a sponge absorbing water. Behind him, a massive digital timer ticked down to the official launch of his brand. Hundreds of thousands of his followers were tuning into the live broadcast from all over the world. "We are not just launching a brand tonight," Jackson yelled into the microphone, his voice booming over the synthesized background track. "We are launching a revolution. For too long, we have been trapped by the old ways, trapped by old thinking, trapped by old rotting structures." He paused, letting the crowd cheer, pointing his finger dramatically toward the ceiling. "To build the future, you have to be willing to completely smash the past," he roared. I narrowed my eyes from the darkness. That was when I saw it. Resting on a velvet display stand at the edge of the stage was the most grotesque, offensive object I had ever seen. It was a heavy, long-handled sledgehammer, but the heavy iron head had been entirely plated in shining, reflective gold. My gaze shifted from the ridiculous weapon to the target directly behind the stage. He had positioned his podium right in front of the legendary signature wall. It was a fragile, exposed section of original Chicago common brickwork where some of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century had signed their names in chalk and charcoal before going on stage decades ago. It was a priceless, irreplaceable piece of American musical history. Jackson intended to pick up that golden sledgehammer and physically smash a hole straight through the signatures of dead legends, live in front of hundreds of thousands of people, just to generate a viral, the controversial internet clip for his new fitness application. It was an act of pure, unadulterated megalomania. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the cameras were his shield. He raised his hands, signaling the crowd to get their phones ready for the ultimate climax. The countdown timer on the screen behind him flashed, signaling 1 minute left until the broadcast reached its peak. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. I reached a perfectly manicured hand up to the heavy iron latch of the service door separating me from the main floor. The hunt was over. It was time for the execution. The crowd of influencers began to chant, counting down from 10. Jackson stepped back, his expensive sneakers gripping the floorboards. He gripped the polished handle of the gold-plated sledgehammer with both hands, his biceps flexing for the camera lenses. He swung the heavy iron head backward over his right shoulder, perfectly positioning himself so the live broadcast would capture the exact moment he shattered the historic signatures. 10, 9, 8. I did not wait for the countdown to reach 0. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket, opened the master control interface for the hidden smart home network I had personally wired into the very skeleton of the building, and pressed the central override command. 7, 6. A massive, physical metallic clank echoed from the main breaker room deep in the basement. Instantly, the aggressive electronic dance music that had been assaulting the room cut off into absolute, dead silence. The blinding electric pink and acid green neon lights died in a fraction of a second, plunging the entire grand lobby into total darkness. The crowd gasped in shock, their glowing phone screens suddenly the only source of illumination. Jackson froze mid-swing, completely blinded, yelling at his production crew to fix the blown fuse. He had no idea it was not a malfunction. It was a hostile takeover. I swiped my thumb upward on my screen. The true soul of the brass crown woke up. The original 1920s lighting grids, meticulously restored with high-wattage vintage tungsten bulbs, surged to life all at once. A sharp, brilliant, and sophisticated golden light flooded the grand hall, casting deep, dramatic shadows and completely washing out the cheap ring lights of the influencers. Simultaneously, I activated the proprietary acoustic system embedded behind the heritage woodwork. I did not use his massive, ugly concert speakers. I used the building itself. An uncompressed, master studio recording of a legendary jazz trumpet solo erupted from the walls at maximum volume. It was a raw, soaring, triumphant blast of pure brass that physically shook the dust off the rafters. The sound was so crisp, so overwhelmingly powerful, that it felt as though the ghost of the musician was standing right in the center of the room, blowing the horn with all his might. The sheer acoustic perfection of the architecture magnified the notes, drowning out the confused shouts of the panicked crowd. The heavy service door slammed open against the wall. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly into the golden light. The crowd of minor celebrities instinctively parted ways, intimidated by the sheer, cold authority radiating from my burgundy suit and the rhythmic, lethal clicking of my stiletto heels against the hardwood floor. I did not look left or right. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the man standing on the stage. Jackson was blinking furiously, trying to adjust his vision to the sudden burst of vintage light. He still had the golden sledgehammer raised above his shoulder, looking like a confused child, caught holding a ridiculous toy. He finally noticed me walking up the short wooden stairs to the platform. Before he could even register my face, I closed the distance between us. I did not hesitate. I reached out, clamped both of my hands around the cold metal shaft of the sledgehammer just below his grip, and violently yanked the weapon downward with every ounce of leverage I possessed. Caught entirely off guard, his grip failed, the heavy iron head plummeted, stopping mere inches from the fragile historical brickwork. I ripped the handle completely out of his hands, turned around, and tossed the grotesque golden tool off the stage. It hit the floor tiles with a deafening heavy crash that echoed cleanly over the roaring trumpet music. Jackson stared at me, his jaw completely unhinged. It took him 3 full seconds to recognize the woman standing in front of him. When he finally matched my face to the grease-covered mechanic from this afternoon, his confusion mutated into explosive, uncontrolled rage. "You!" Jackson screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple, completely abandoning his carefully crafted media persona. "You are that crazy maintenance worker. Have you completely lost your mind? Security, get in here right now. Grab this lunatic and throw her out into the street." The 2 massive guards from the front doors shoved their way through the murmuring crowd, rushing toward the stage with their hands reaching for their communication radios. They were fully prepared to drag me away by force. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I maintained eye contact with Jackson, calmly raised my phone, and tapped the final command sequence. Behind Jackson, the massive digital countdown screen that had been displaying his brand logo glitched violently. The image shattered into digital static for a brief moment. Then, a towering, high-definition scan of a certified legal document materialized on the screen, towering 20 feet high for everyone in the room to see. It was the absolute deed of ownership for the property, highlighted in bright yellow digital ink, impossible to misread, was the name of the sole legal proprietor, Gianna Simmons. The 2 security guards halted instantly, their boots skidding on the polished floor. They looked at the massive screen, then looked back at me, standing tall and unbothered in my tailored suit. They were paid contractors. They were not paid enough to physically assault the legal owner of the building they were hired to protect. They slowly lowered their hands and backed away, leaving Jackson completely isolated on the platform. The roaring trumpet solo faded out, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence in the room. The only sound was the collective clicking of hundreds of smartphone cameras continuing to broadcast every single second to the world. I stepped forward and calmly pulled the wireless microphone from Jackson's limp, trembling hand. I turned my back to him, facing the sea of glowing lenses, addressing the tens of thousands of people watching the live broadcast from their living rooms. "My name is Gianna Simmons," I announced, my voice echoing with crystal-clear precision through the flawless acoustics of the hall. "I am the founder of Crescent Heritage Holdings, and I am the sole legal owner of the Brass Crown. I apologize for the interruption to your evening, but I have an urgent corporate update regarding the future of this property." I turned slightly, ensuring Jackson was perfectly framed behind me in the broadcast shot. His face was completely drained of blood, pale and sweating under the hot lights. "The proposed $28 million acquisition of this historic landmark by Mr. Jackson Vance is hereby permanently canceled, effective immediately," I declared, my tone utterly devoid of emotion. A massive collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Phones were raised higher. The live chat feeds on the broadcast monitors began to scroll so fast they became a blur of text. "Mr. Vance did not simply breach a standard business contract," I continued, speaking slowly and methodically, ensuring every single word cut through the air like a razor blade. "He deliberately submitted fabricated, fraudulent construction documents to the City Municipal Council. He legally swore to preserve this heritage site, while simultaneously hiring an illegal, unauthorized demolition crew to breach the premises in the middle of the night. His intention was to secretly destroy Grade 1 protected structural assets." Jackson lunged forward, desperately trying to grab the microphone back, but I smoothly sidestepped his clumsy reach, leaving him stumbling off balance in front of the cameras. "This man," I said, pointing a single, perfectly manicured finger at his chest, "believed his wealth placed him above the law. He believed he could lie to the government, deceive his investors, and destroy a piece of our shared cultural history just to sell you gym clothes. He was entirely wrong." I stood tall, the vintage golden light illuminating the undeniable truth of my victory. The predator had completely crushed the prey, and the entire world was watching the blood spill. The sheer gravity of the moment finally crashed down upon Jackson Vance. The arrogant, invincible tech billionaire was suddenly gone, replaced by a terrified man drowning in the very digital fishbowl he had built to worship himself. He looked at the hundreds of glowing camera lenses pointed directly at his sweating face. His empire was disintegrating in real time. Desperation overrode his pride. He took a frantic step toward me, reaching out and grabbing my wrist, leaning in close so the microphones would not pick up his voice. "Listen to me," Jackson pleaded, his voice a pathetic, shaking whisper. "I will wire you an extra $5 million in pure cash. Tonight, right now, I will transfer it directly into your private account. Just turn off the cameras. Call this a misunderstanding. And let me have the building. Name your price. 10 million. Just stop this." He still did not understand. He genuinely believed that the universe was a vending machine, and if he just shoved enough cash into the slot, he could buy his way out of his own execution. I smoothly pulled my arm out of his desperate grip. I reached inside my tailored blazer and withdrew the heavy, deep crimson envelope containing the emergency contract termination. I did not break eye contact. I did not utter a single word of negotiation. I simply tossed the thick red envelope directly into his chest. He fumbled to catch it, his hands shaking so violently that it slipped through his fingers and landed flat on the wooden stage floor. "I am not interested in your money," I said clearly into the microphone. "I am interested in justice, and I am not finished." I tapped the master control screen on my phone one final time. The massive projection screen behind us shifted. The legal deed of ownership vanished, replaced by the crisp, high-definition black and white security footage from the hidden basement cameras. The timestamp read 11:15 from the previous night. The entire room watched in stunned silence as the giant screen displayed Jackson and his demolition crew prying open the restricted basement doors. They watched his men use laser levels and heavy drills on the historic timber. They watched as Jackson personally pointed at the protected red oak pillars, ordering his crew to mark them with fluorescent paint. To seal his fate, I routed the audio from the lobby surveillance cameras recorded earlier that afternoon through the massive acoustic walls. Jackson's own voice boomed through the hall, loud and undeniable. "We are going to rip out all that rotting antique wood, pour a fresh slab of concrete, and build a massive neon-lit infinity sauna." The recording echoed. This was no longer a civil contract dispute. The footage was irrefutable, undeniable proof of a premeditated, state-level heritage crime. Jackson's pocket suddenly began to vibrate frantically. Then his smartwatch lit up. Then the phones of his entire management team standing off stage started chiming in chaotic unison. The major venture capital firms and angel investors who had bankrolled his entire company were watching the live stream. Seeing their CEO commit a documented felony live on the internet was the ultimate financial poison. Jackson pulled his phone out with trembling hands. I could see the reflection of the screen in his terrified eyes. Message after message was flooding in. Board members were resigning. Major investors were instantly pulling their capital. His entire net worth was evaporating bite by bite. Before he could even attempt to form an excuse, the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand lobby swung open. 4 men wearing municipal windbreakers and displaying silver badges stepped into the golden light. I had called the city's Structural Inspection Division 3 hours ago, providing them with a preliminary copy of the security tape. They had been waiting outside for my signal. The state inspectors marched straight down the center aisle. The crowd of influencers eagerly parted ways, shoving their phone cameras directly into Jackson's face to capture his humiliation. The lead inspector stepped onto the stage, completely ignoring the cameras, and handed Jackson a thick stack of legal citations for severe structural safety violations and unauthorized criminal trespassing. They flanked him on both sides and sternly ordered him to leave the premises immediately. Jackson Vance, the man who had walked into my building treating me like dirt just a few hours ago, was publicly marched out of the hall like a common criminal, his head hung low in absolute defeat. Within 20 minutes, the entire grand lobby was completely cleared. The influencers scattered like roaches when the lights come on, eager to rush home and upload the viral footage of the billionaire's spectacular downfall. As the last of the production crew hastily packed up their cables, I spotted Jackson's lead assistant attempting to sneak out the side door, dragging a heavy silver equipment suitcase behind him. Hold on a second, I called out, my voice echoing in the emptying hall. The assistant froze, looking at me with pure terror. I walked slowly over to him. I reached into the breast pocket of my blazer and pulled out the crumpled $100 bill that Jackson had thrown at my feet that afternoon. I reached out and firmly tucked the crumpled cash into the breast pocket of the assistant's shirt. "A tip for your boss's stupidity," I said with a cold, polite smile. "Make sure he uses it to buy a decent lawyer. He's going to need one." The assistant swallowed hard, nodded frantically, and ran out the door into the night. Finally, the heavy doors clicked shut. The brass crown was completely empty. It was just me and the quiet, breathing soul of the building. The golden vintage lights cast warm reflections off the polished wood. I walked over to the mahogany bar, poured myself a single, neat glass of authentic Kentucky bourbon, and took a slow, burning sip. A smooth, soulful saxophone began to play through the acoustic system, filling the room with a triumphant, undeniable peace. I stood alone in the center of the grand hall, smiling, knowing that this beautiful historic masterpiece was finally, truly, and safely mine forever. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.